The phone rang at exactly 10:32 a.m. The sound sliced through the otherwise quiet, orderly atmosphere of the office. Charles Carter, the CEO of a tech company valued in the billions, sat alone in his sleek, modern office. His desk was organized to perfection, each paper in its place, every digital file logged, and the high-rise view outside was both pristine and isolating. The interruption was unwelcome. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He rolled his eyes, expecting a telemarketer or a nuisance call, nothing out of the ordinary. A small part of him considered ignoring it, but then, as if an invisible force had nudged him, he clicked the green button. Hello? His voice, always calm and in control, was laced with the slightest hint of annoyance. Mr. Carter? The voice on the other end was strained, anxious, and somewhat unfamiliar. It caught his attention immediately. This is St. Michael's Hospital. We have your son here. He's just been born. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His brain went completely blank for a moment. A son, he repeated, his voice shaky as disbelief filled him. What? You're mistaken. I don't have a son. The voice on the other end faltered but didn't back down. Mr. Carter, this is St. Michael's. We have your son here. We need you to come to the hospital immediately. There are some things we need to discuss. His heart skipped a beat. His mouth went dry. He stared at the phone as if it had suddenly turned into a foreign object. I don't understand, he managed to force out. What are you talking about? Sir, we understand this may be a shock, but we need you here. Your son was just born, Anne. The words kept swirling in his head, but they didn't seem to make sense. A son? Born? He hadn't even known he was a father. He felt dizzy, as if the world beneath his feet was shaking. He pressed a hand to his forehead. I don't know what's going on. I've never. Sir, please. We understand this is confusing, but your son, he's here. We need you here, now. The line went silent for a split second, and then he heard the sound of papers rustling on the other end. The voice was quieter now, almost apologetic. There's something important we need to tell you when you arrive. The phone call ended abruptly. Charles stared at the phone in his hand, his mind still reeling. A son? How could this be? He had no memory of ever being with someone, no recollection of any pregnancy, and most certainly no knowledge of a child in his life. His gaze dropped to the floor as if he were trying to find the missing pieces to a puzzle he didn't even know he was supposed to be solving. His pulse raced. He could feel the weight of his own confusion pressing down on his chest. His instincts kicked in. He stood up suddenly, too quickly, and his chair rolled back. The sound of it scraping against the hardwood floor echoed in the silence of his office. His hand gripped the desk, his knuckles turning white. What did this mean? A part of him, deep down, beneath the layers of shock, was already reacting. A father's instinct? Maybe. Or maybe it was the deep-rooted feeling that something was terribly wrong. Whatever it was undeniable. He grabbed his jacket and headed toward the door, but something held him back. He glanced at the phone one last time. Should he make a call? Try to understand more before heading to the hospital? But before he could decide, he shoved the phone back into his pocket and strode out of the office, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. The city skyline blurred past as his thoughts swirled. His usually sharp mind, which could analyze complex deals and break down strategies in minutes, was now completely paralyzed by the bizarre nature of the situation. He ran through every possible scenario in his head, but none of them made sense. Who was this child? How had he not known? He pulled into the hospital parking lot with shaky hands. The heavy doors of the building loomed ahead. Each step felt heavier than the last. As he walked through the sterile hallways, his mind raced through 100 questions. Who could have known? Who was involved in this? How could this child, his child, have been born without him knowing? Finally, a nurse appeared at the end of the hallway. She had a kind face, but the urgency in her eyes mirrored his own. "Mr. Carter?" she asked. "Yes," he replied, his voice hoarse. "Where is he?" She gave a small, sympathetic smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Follow me, please." He followed her down a corridor, every step echoing in the silence. The hospital was quiet, but there was an almost tangible tension in the air. They stopped at a door near the end of the hallway. The nurse opened it with a soft click. Inside, a small bassinet sat beside a bed. Charles stepped into the room, his eyes immediately landing on the tiny figure wrapped in a pale blue blanket. The baby lay still, eyes closed, peaceful, yet surrounded by a cold uncertainty. That's him?" His voice cracked as he looked down at the baby. The little boy was impossibly small, his features delicate and unformed, but there was no mistaking it, the child was his. The nurse nodded, stepping aside. "Yes, Mr. Carter. Your son. He's healthy, but there's more you need to know." Charles didn't hear her. His mind was consumed by the image of the child before him. The boy's tiny fingers were curled into delicate fists, his chest rising and falling slowly with each breath. He couldn't shake the thought that something was wrong. Everything felt wrong. "Mr. Carter," the nurse continued, snapping him out of his trance. "There's something you need to understand about how your son came to be here." He raised his head, his eyes now meeting hers, filled with a mix of confusion and apprehension. "What do you mean?" The nurse hesitated for a moment, as if unsure how much to say. Then she took a deep breath. "This child didn't come into the world the way most babies do. There's a complicated story surrounding his birth, and we think you need to know everything before you make any decisions." Charles's heart pounded in his chest. His stomach turned as he looked at the nurse, then back down at the baby. What the hell was going on? "Tell me," he said, his voice cold, but the tremor of fear was unmistakable. The nurse nodded, then turned to leave. "I'll get the doctor. I think you need to hear this from him." Charles stood there, his legs barely holding him up. His mind buzzed with the implications of what he'd just heard. The baby was his. But what else was there to know? How had it happened? Why hadn't anyone told him? Was he really ready for the truth? He wasn't sure. But he knew one thing for certain. His life had just been turned upside down. Charles stood by the bassinet, his eyes fixed on the baby. He couldn't tear his gaze away from the tiny figure that, somehow, was tied to him. His heart raced, and his mind struggled to process the information that had been thrust upon him in the last few hours. A son. A child he didn't know about. A child he hadn't even known existed until moments ago. He shook his head, trying to snap himself out of the fog of confusion. His breathing was shallow. He had to get a grip. The nurse's words echoed in his mind, "There's more you need to know." But what could be worse than this? The door creaked open behind him, and he turned to see a tall man step inside. He was dressed in a white coat, his expression grave but composed. A doctor, no doubt. "Mr. Carter?" the doctor asked, his voice calm yet carrying an undercurrent of something deeper, something unspoken. Charles nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes. I need answers. Now." The doctor gave him a nod, his eyes flickering briefly to the baby in the bassinet before focusing back on Charles. "I understand this is a lot to take in. But I need you to hear me out. There are things about your son's birth that are highly unusual." Charles felt a tightening in his chest. Unusual? What the hell did that mean? He had so many questions, so many things swirling in his mind. He had never imagined his life could be upended like this, by a single phone call, a single revelation. But now that it had, he needed to know everything. "Tell me everything," Charles demanded, his voice rough, impatient. His legs were beginning to feel weak, his whole body trembling with the weight of the unknown. The doctor took a deep breath, clearly trying to figure out how to break the news. He glanced down at the baby again before stepping closer to Charles, lowering his voice slightly. "Mr. Carter, this is not your typical situation. Your son, he wasn't conceived the way most children are. There are circumstances surrounding his birth that go far beyond a traditional story." Charles's brow furrowed, and he took a step back, his mind racing. What was the doctor talking about? This wasn't some kind of weird adoption, was it? His mind flashed to the possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. "Are you saying, this isn't my son?" Charles asked, his voice quiet, barely above a whisper. He didn't know if he was hoping for an answer he could accept or dreading it. The doctor shook his head. "No. He's your son, Mr. Carter. There's no doubt about that. The DNA tests confirm it." A wave of confusion hit Charles once more. DNA tests? That didn't explain anything. "Then what is it?" he demanded, his patience wearing thin. "What's so complicated? Why the hell didn't anyone tell me about this?" The doctor exhaled, his eyes filled with sympathy. "The truth is, Mr. Carter, your son's birth was orchestrated in a way that goes beyond medical norms. In fact, it goes beyond what we're used to dealing with in the hospital." Charles clenched his fists, frustration growing. "What do you mean, orchestrated?" The doctor's eyes darted to the door briefly before he stepped closer. "I think it's time for you to meet the woman who was involved in this." Charles blinked. "Woman? What woman?" The doctor hesitated. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but instead, he simply nodded toward the hallway. "Follow me." Charles followed the doctor down the corridor, his legs heavy with dread. Every step felt like it was pulling him deeper into a nightmare he had no idea he was even a part of. He wasn't sure whether he was more afraid of the truth or the fact that he had no control over what was happening. They stopped in front of a closed door. The doctor knocked gently before pushing the door open. Inside, a woman sat at the edge of a bed, her face partly obscured by her long, dark hair. She looked up as they entered, her eyes tired but alert. Her gaze locked on Charles, and for a split second, there was something about her, something in her eyes, that felt familiar. "Mr. Carter," the doctor said softly, "this is Laura." Charles stood frozen. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Laura? He had heard that name before. Laura Williams. But the memories were hazy, distant. He couldn't quite place her, but there was a sense of recognition. A sense of connection. Something in his gut told him that this woman was somehow tied to the mystery of his son's birth, but how? "Laura," Charles said slowly, his voice barely audible. "I don't understand. I know you, don't I?" Laura's expression flickered with something. Was it guilt? Regret? She nodded, but she didn't speak. Instead, the doctor cleared his throat, stepping forward to explain. "Mr. Carter," the doctor began, "Laura was involved in this process from the very beginning. She carried your son." He paused, as though measuring his words carefully. "She was implanted with an embryo that was, yours." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, waiting to break. Charles felt his knees go. Weak. Implanted? Embryo? His mind scrambled to piece it all together. It was like someone had handed him a puzzle, but none of the pieces fit. "Wait," Charles managed to say, his voice hoarse. "What are you saying? That I had something to do with this?" Laura finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. Yes. You did. But I never wanted you to find out this way. I never wanted it to be like this. Charles stepped back, his mind spiraling. He looked from the doctor to Laura and back again. This doesn't make sense. I never agreed to anything like this. Laura stood up then, her eyes pleading with him. I know. But things happened, things I never could have predicted. The doctor raised a hand, signaling for Laura to stop. Mr. Carter, I know this is a lot to absorb. But the bottom line is, this child is yours. He was conceived under very unusual circumstances, but he is your son. Charles turned away, his mind reeling. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear the blood rushing in his ears. His whole world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. The woman who claimed to have carried his child was someone he had no memory of, and the child lying in that bassinet was a complete stranger. A son. His son. But it felt like everything was happening in slow motion, as if he were watching someone else's life unfold. I need time, he said, his voice barely audible. The doctor nodded sympathetically, but Laura stepped forward, her eyes desperate. Please, Charles. I know this is hard. But I need you to understand. I never meant for any of this to happen. Charles shook his head, unable to look her in the eye. I don't know what to believe anymore, he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. I don't know what the hell is going on. As he turned to leave the room, he caught a glimpse of the baby again, lying so peacefully in the bassinet, unaware of the chaos surrounding his existence. Everything had changed. Nothing made sense. But he had to figure it out. He had to find the truth. And he would, no matter what it cost. Charles sat in his hotel room, the only light coming from the dim glow of the bedside lamp. His thoughts were a swirling storm, a chaotic mess of questions and half-formed answers that didn't seem to make sense. He had barely slept since the hospital, if you could even call it sleep. The moments that had transpired over the last 24 hours played in his mind like a broken record, each thought more disturbing than the last. His son. The words repeated over and over in his head. A son he didn't know existed. A son born in circumstances that no one had bothered to explain. Not clearly. Not completely. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking his thoughts. He reached for it, his hand shaking slightly as he saw the name on the screen. It was an unfamiliar number, one that made his stomach turn in an unsettling way. He hesitated, then answered. Hello? His voice sounded hollow, distant. As if it wasn't his own. There was a brief silence on the other end before a deep, gravelly voice spoke. Mr. Carter? Charles stiffened. The voice was unmistakable, the tone too calm to be good news. It was the lawyer, his family's lawyer, the one who had handled all their personal matters for years. But why was he calling at this hour? Yes, Charles said, his voice hoarse. What is it? We need to talk, the lawyer said. It's about your son. The mention of his son made a chill run through Charles's veins. His heart rate quickened. This wasn't just a casual call. There was something else behind the lawyer's words, urgency, maybe even fear. What about him? Charles asked, his tone sharp despite the fog of confusion clouding his mind. Meet me in person, the lawyer said, his voice low. There's something you need to know, something important. I can't do this anymore, Charles snapped, his frustration spilling out. I don't know what's going on. I've been thrown into this nightmare, and now you want me to meet you for some vague information? What do you know? The lawyer paused, then let out a breath, his voice softer but still filled with gravity. Charles, I know this is overwhelming. I can't explain everything over the phone. But trust me, you need to meet me. Tomorrow. I'll be at the office. 10 a.m. Don't miss it. This isn't something you can ignore. The line went dead before Charles could respond. The phone slipped from his hand and onto the bed, and he collapsed back against the headboard, his mind still reeling. What the hell was going on? He had already heard too many strange things in the last 24 hours. The phone call from the hospital, the doctor's words, the cryptic conversation with Laura. It felt like he was trapped in a maze, with no clear path and no way out. His mind wandered back to the conversation with the doctor. The man had told him that his son had been orchestrated. What did that mean? How could his own child be part of some larger plan that he hadn't agreed to? That wasn't possible. But the more he thought about it, the more his mind refused to let go of the questions. Why didn't he remember any of this? Why hadn't Laura, this stranger, told him the truth before now? The deeper he went, the more tangled everything became. The next morning, Charles found himself sitting in the lawyer's office, staring blankly at the polished wood desk between them. The lawyer, a man in his late 50s with graying hair and sharp features, was sitting across from him, his hands steepled in front of him, as if preparing to reveal something monumental. Charles couldn't take it anymore. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice tinged with both anger and confusion. "What are you not telling me?" The lawyer's eyes flickered for a moment, but he said nothing. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a thick file, setting it on the desk in front of Charles. The man's demeanor was serious, bordering on somber. "Open it," the lawyer said, his voice soft but firm. Charles hesitated, then took the file, flipping it open. The first page contained a birth certificate. His son's birth certificate. He scanned the details, but something about it seemed off. His name was listed as the father, and everything appeared to be in order, until he got to the name of the mother. It wasn't Laura's name. His pulse spiked. The name was unfamiliar, yet somehow, it struck a chord. It was a name he had heard years ago. A name from his past that he thought he had long buried. His mind raced to piece it all together. The woman's name was Hannah Drake. "I know that name," Charles whispered under his breath. The lawyer nodded. "You should. Hannah Drake was someone you knew well. She was someone you—" "I don't remember her," Charles interrupted, shaking his head, his thoughts swirling. "I don't know anyone by that name." The lawyer sighed, leaning forward slightly. "Hannah Drake was a part of your life long before all of this happened. You met her years ago, before you even became CEO. She was someone you were very close to, Charles. And her connection to your son is complicated." Charles stared at the lawyer, his confusion deepening. "Close to me?" he asked, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. "I don't remember her. How could I have known her like that?" The lawyer opened the file further, revealing more documents. He picked out one and handed it to Charles. "This is the DNA report. You'll see that it confirms your son's paternity. But there's something else. Something in the results that you need to understand." Charles looked down at the report, his eyes scanning the page in a blur. He didn't know what he was looking at, but his gaze froze when he saw something that made his stomach drop. Hannah Drake's name was listed as the woman who had carried the child. And then, beneath it, a note. "Surrogate mother, artificial insemination." "What the hell is this?" Charles asked, his voice tight with shock. The lawyer exhaled slowly, his expression grim. "Hannah was the one who carried your child. But she didn't do it out of some simple act of kindness. She did it for reasons you have yet to understand. Your connection to her, and to the child, goes beyond just biology, Charles. It's a part of something much larger." The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but Charles couldn't keep up. His mind was spinning too fast, unable to fully grasp what was happening. "You have to help me understand this," he demanded, his voice rising. "Why was I never told? Why wasn't I involved in this?" why wasn't I ever given a choice? The lawyer remained silent for a moment, his hands still clasped together, his face unreadable. Then he finally spoke, his voice softer now. Because, Charles, the lawyer began, Hannah was part of something far bigger than just your personal life. She was involved in a secret project, one that you were unknowingly a part of. The child, your son, is the result of something you agreed to long ago. A project that you have no memory of. Charles's head spun, and he leaned back in his chair, staring blankly at the lawyer. I agreed to this? He couldn't wrap his mind around it. When? How? This doesn't make sense. The lawyer's gaze softened, but there was something almost apologetic in his eyes. I think it's time for you to remember, Charles. It's time for you to remember what you were involved in. Charles couldn't shake the feeling that his world was unraveling faster than he could grasp it. His fingers trembled as he slowly set the file down on the desk. The weight of what he had just read, the information the lawyer had just shared, was too much to bear. Every question he had seemed to be answered with even more confusion. Who was Hannah Drake, really? And what did he have to do with the child? The lawyer, seeing the turmoil written on Charles's face, leaned forward slightly, as if waiting for him to ask more questions. But Charles was speechless. His mind raced, his thoughts colliding in every direction. He couldn't wrap his head around any of it. He didn't even know where to start. I don't remember anything, Charles said quietly, his voice distant. How could I have been involved in something like this? I don't remember her. I don't remember anything. The lawyer sat back, folding his hands together. It's understandable that you don't recall, Charles. This wasn't something you would have been allowed to remember. Charles's eyes snapped up, meeting the lawyer's gaze. What do you mean, allowed to remember? What's that supposed to mean? The lawyer hesitated, his gaze shifting momentarily before he spoke again. The project you were involved in wasn't just about science or business. It was about control, Charles. Control over things that most people wouldn't even imagine. What you agreed to, well, it was more than just a contract. It was a pact. A pact? Charles echoed, his mind struggling to process the implications of the word. What kind of pact? The lawyer took a deep breath, clearly gathering his thoughts. The project was called Genesis. It was a top-secret initiative involving a number of prominent individuals, people with power, influence, and resources. And you, Charles, were one of the primary investors. Charles blinked, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. Investors? In what? In genetics, the lawyer explained. In human reproduction. Specifically, genetic engineering. Charles leaned forward, a sense of disbelief washing over him. Genetic engineering? Are you telling me I was involved in some kind of science experiment? The lawyer nodded slowly, his expression grave. Yes. Genesis was focused on creating a new generation of humans, ones that were genetically superior, with abilities that were beyond the scope of ordinary people. The goal was to design children with extraordinary traits that could change the course of history. Charles felt the blood drain from his face. But, why didn't I know any of this? Why was I kept in the dark? That's part of the secrecy, the lawyer explained. Those involved were kept in the dark about the specifics of the project. You were only made aware of certain aspects of it, the parts that were relevant to your involvement. The rest, well, it was kept hidden. But why? Why me? Charles asked, his voice rising slightly in frustration. What did I have to do with this? I'm just a CEO. I didn't even know this kind of thing was possible. The lawyer's face softened, but only slightly. You weren't just a CEO, Charles. You were a man with ambition, someone who had the resources and the vision to make things happen. Your company, Carter Enterprises, was at the forefront of the tech industry. You were influential, connected, and a key player in the world of innovation. They needed someone like you to fund the project. But the nature of it was so sensitive, they couldn't let you, or anyone, know the full extent of what was happening. Charles sat back, his mind whirling. He had always prided himself on his ability to control every situation, to be the one pulling the strings. But now, sitting in this sterile office, he felt completely powerless. This wasn't just some corporate deal gone wrong, it was something far more sinister, something that touched on the very fabric of human existence. But if this is true, then my son, Charles trailed off, unable to finish the thought. He couldn't even begin to fathom what that meant. Your son, the lawyer said carefully, is the result of Genesis. The genetic project. He was not born the way most children are. He was engineered, created with specific traits in mind. And his existence, well, it's part of a much bigger plan. Charles's stomach churned. His eyes drifted back to the file on the desk. His son, a product of something so unnatural, so foreign to what he had ever imagined for his life. He wasn't just a father, he was a part of a scientific experiment, a player in something far beyond his understanding. How could I have been part of this? Charles asked, his voice low, barely above a whisper. How could I have agreed to something like this without knowing? I didn't sign up for this. I didn't choose this. The lawyer remained silent for a moment before responding. You didn't consciously agree, Charles. You were persuaded. The project's creators made sure that your memory was altered, that the details were hidden from you. The idea was to use your resources, your company, without your full knowledge. But it's not just about the money. You were chosen for another reason. Charles narrowed his eyes. Chosen for what? Your DNA, the lawyer said. It's special. Your genetic makeup is unique. They needed someone with your profile to make this project work. And your child, your son, is the culmination of that. A sinking feeling washed over Charles. What does that mean for me? For my son? What are they going to do with him? I'm not sure, the lawyer admitted, his voice hesitant. But that's something you'll have to find out. The people behind Genesis, they have their own agenda. And now, you and your son are at the center of it. Charles stood up abruptly, the weight of everything crashing down on him. He walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. His mind raced, struggling to process everything. He wasn't just a victim in all of this. He was a part of something far greater than he had ever imagined. What do I do now? He asked, his voice barely audible. You need to go to the facility, the lawyer said. The one where your son was born. You need to confront the people behind Genesis. They're the only ones who can answer the questions you have. But be careful, Charles. These people are dangerous. They will stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Charles turned slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. And what happens if I don't? What if I just walk away from all of this? The lawyer's eyes darkened. Then you and your son will be lost in this web of lies and deceit. And whatever this project was meant to achieve, it will continue without you. Your life will never be the same again. Charles's mind was reeling. He had always been in control of his destiny. But now? Now he was caught in a game that he didn't even know he was playing. And the only way out was to dive deeper into the very thing that had brought him to this point. I'll go, Charles said, his voice steady. I'll do whatever it takes to get answers. For my son. Charles stood at the threshold of the sterile, clinical building, the Genesis facility, a place that seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, as if it knew something he didn't. The weight of what he had learned over the last few days felt like an anchor, pulling him down with every step he took toward the entrance. His hands trembled, and despite his best efforts to maintain composure, doubt gnawed at his insides. He had been told to come here by the lawyer. To confront the people behind Genesis, to seek answers about the project, about his son, and most importantly, about what this twisted pact was all about. He had no choice now. He had walked too far into the abyss to turn back. The security guard at the entrance gave him a quick, professional nod as Charles walked through the metal detectors and into the cold, fluorescent-lit lobby. It felt too much like a dream, a nightmare, like he was about to enter a place he could never leave. A woman at the reception desk, with a name tag reading Dr. Madeline Chase, glanced up as he approached. Her expression was one of practiced neutrality, but her eyes flickered for a brief moment when she recognized him. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice calm yet somehow distant, like she had anticipated his arrival. "We've been expecting you." Charles didn't respond at first, unsure of what to say. His mind was swirling, a hurricane of thoughts, all of them leading him to one terrifying conclusion: this was no ordinary visit. Whatever had been set into motion with Genesis, it was bigger than he had imagined. Bigger than anything he had ever been involved in. "Follow me," Dr. Chase instructed, gesturing toward the hallway that stretched ahead of them, flanked by clinical rooms and the quiet hum of machines. Charles took one last look at the outside world, a fleeting moment of clarity before stepping further into the depths of the unknown. As he walked down the corridor, each step felt heavier, each breath more labored. He wanted to turn around and run. But that would only delay the inevitable. "Genesis is not what you think it is, Mr. Carter," Dr. Chase said, her voice breaking through the fog of his thoughts. "You're about to learn things that will change the way you see everything. Are you prepared for that?" He didn't answer at first. His gaze drifted to the sealed doors they passed, each one marked with a string of numbers and letters that seemed to taunt him, hinting at secrets far beyond his comprehension. The facility felt like it had been designed to disorient, to make him question reality itself. And he didn't know if he was ready to face the truth. "I have no choice," he said finally, the words feeling like a promise to himself. He couldn't go back now. Whatever this was, whatever Genesis was, he was already in too deep. Dr. Chase nodded, as though she had expected this response. "Very well," she said, pushing open a door at the end of the hallway. The room beyond it was dimly lit, and there was an eerie quiet that hung in the air, as if the entire space was holding its breath. Inside, Charles saw a man seated behind a desk. He appeared to be in his late 50s, with gray hair and a sharp, calculating look in his eyes. His suit was expensive, but it was the cold demeanor that sent a shiver down Charles's spine. This was not a man who dealt in the ordinary. "Mr. Carter," the man said, standing up slowly as Charles entered. "I'm Dr. Richard Powell. I'm sure you've heard my name before, but I believe you're here to understand the full extent of what we've done." Charles nodded, unable to speak. The words stuck in his throat. All he could do was watch as the man walked over to a nearby table, pulling a file from a drawer. He placed it in front of Charles, but before Charles could reach for it, Dr. Powell spoke again. "You'll find the answers you seek inside that file, Mr. Carter. But know this, there's much more at play here than just the project. This goes beyond science, beyond money. What you've been a part of is far more significant than you can imagine." Charles felt a tightness in his chest as he stared at the file. His hands hovered above it, but it was as if an invisible force was holding him back. It was almost as though the file itself had the power to change everything. "What is Genesis?" Charles finally asked, the question burning in his throat. He needed to know. He had to know. Dr. Powell smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they've just won a game and know their opponent has no idea what's coming next. "Genesis, Mr. Carter, is not just a project. It's a vision. A vision of the future. A future where the human race is elevated beyond the limits of our biology. The idea is simple: we've taken the building blocks of life and enhanced them, pushed them beyond the natural boundaries of evolution. Charles shook his head. This is madness. You're talking about altering the very essence of what it means to be human. Exactly, Dr. Powell said, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Humanity's potential is bound by its genetics. But what if those genes could be manipulated, perfected? What if we could design individuals with superior intelligence, strength, and resilience? Charles felt his stomach churn. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined. And it was only the beginning. You're saying that my son, he's a product of this experiment? Charles asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Powell's smile widened, but there was no humor in it. Your son, Mr. Carter, is the result of our greatest success. He was the culmination of years of research, years of planning. And now, he's yours to raise. He's the future of humanity, Charles. He's the first of many. Charles's heart pounded in his chest. This was not just about him anymore. This was about something far more significant, something that could change the entire course of history. But the thought of his son being part of some experiment, a pawn in a game of science and manipulation, sent a chill through him. No, Charles said, his voice growing firmer. I won't let you use him like this. Dr. Powell's expression darkened. You have no choice, Mr. Carter. Your son is already part of this world. And there's no turning back now. Charles's mind raced. His options were running out, and he knew that the deeper he went into this, the less control he would have over the outcome. But there was one thing he couldn't let go of, the truth. He had to uncover it, no matter the cost. I want to see him, Charles said suddenly, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. Dr. Powell raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by Charles's request. You want to see him? You're already seeing the consequences of what he is, Mr. Carter. But if you truly want to see the future, then follow me. Without another word, Dr. Powell turned on his heel and led Charles down another corridor, one that seemed to stretch on endlessly. The air grew colder as they walked, the silence between them pressing down on Charles like a weight. He had no idea what awaited him at the end of this journey, but he knew one thing for sure, nothing would ever be the same again. Finally, they arrived at a door marked with a simple number, room 43. Dr. Powell opened it, revealing a dimly lit room beyond. Inside, there was a small crib, and in that crib lay a child, a boy, no more than a few months old. He looked perfectly ordinary, but there was something unsettling about him. Something that made Charles's skin crawl. The boy's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Charles felt a pang of recognition. This was his son. But not just any child. This was the future. This was what Genesis had created. Charles stepped forward, his hands shaking. He reached out to touch the crib's edge, but before he could make contact, Dr. Powell's voice stopped him. Don't touch him, Powell warned. You're not ready to understand what he is. Not yet. Charles froze, a cold sweat forming on the back of his neck. His son, the boy he had never known, was part of something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. And he was about to find out just how deep the rabbit hole went. Charles's heart hammered against his chest as he stood frozen in front of the crib. The soft glow of the overhead lights illuminated his son's delicate features, but there was something in the boy's eyes, a depth that should not have been there for someone so young. Charles could barely breathe, his mind racing with the implications of everything he had learned in the past few days. This is madness, he whispered, his voice hoarse. You've created a child, a weapon, a tool. This isn't what it should be. He's just a baby. Dr. Powell stood beside him, watching the child with an almost detached expression. You're wrong, Mr. Carter. Your son isn't a tool. He's the future. He's the next step in human evolution. And it's your responsibility to guide him, to help him fulfill his potential. Charles felt a chill run down his spine. The words hung in the air, thick with something dark, something unnatural. He looked at the baby again, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. The child's gaze never wavered, locked onto him with an intensity that felt almost predatory. But it was also knowing. Charles couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a baby staring up at him. It was something far more complex, far more dangerous. "Why me?" Charles blurted out, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Why did you choose me? Why not someone else?" Dr. Powell gave him a sideways glance, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "We didn't choose you, Mr. Carter. You were always meant to be part of this. Your bloodline, your genetic makeup, it was all in the plan from the beginning. You're his father, yes, but you were also a part of the project before you even knew it. You were a pawn, but now you're part of the game." A heavy silence filled the room as Charles tried to process the words. His mind raced, grasping at the fragments of information that had been thrown at him. It felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet, like everything he had ever known was crumbling away. He had been chosen, not just because of his bloodline, but because he had been part of something much larger. Something he had never agreed to, never understood, until now. "Am I supposed to raise him?" Charles asked, his voice faltering. "Am I supposed to pretend that everything is normal?" Dr. Powell shrugged. "You don't have a choice. The child is yours. His upbringing will determine what kind of man he becomes. You'll either guide him, or you'll watch him become something far worse." Charles felt his stomach tighten at the words. What could be worse than this? What could be worse than what Genesis had already turned his life into? He took a step back from the crib, his gaze never leaving the child. His mind swirled with thoughts of what this meant for the future. What if this was just the beginning? What if there were more children like him, more projects, more experiments, more manipulations? And who else was involved in this? Was there a network of people, pulling the strings, controlling everything from the shadows? "I don't believe this," Charles said quietly, his mind still reeling. "I can't just accept this. I don't care what you say, I won't be a part of your experiment. He's a child, not your weapon." Dr. Powell's smile faded. "You have no choice, Mr. Carter. You'll soon realize that. There are forces at play here far beyond your understanding. You don't get to walk away from this." Charles was about to speak again when the door to the room swung open suddenly. A man in a lab coat walked in, tall, thin, with glasses perched on the edge of his nose. His face was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes held a quiet urgency that made Charles tense up immediately. "Dr. Powell," the man said, his voice sharp. "There's a situation in the lower labs. We need you immediately." Powell's gaze flickered to Charles, his expression unreadable. "It's nothing, Mr. Carter. A minor issue. We'll deal with it shortly. But before I go, I want you to understand something." He stepped closer to Charles, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "What we've done, what we're doing, it's bigger than any of us. You don't know the full scope yet, but you will. Soon, you'll see. And when you do, you'll understand why we had to do it. We're changing the world." Charles stood there, staring at Dr. Powell, trying to keep his composure. "Changing the world," he scoffed. "You're playing God." "You're wrong," Powell countered. "We're evolving it. This is how humanity survives. This is how we move forward." His eyes narrowed as if searching for some hint of understanding in Charles's expression. "The world you know is fragile, Mr. Carter. The world we're creating is invincible." Without another word, Dr. Powell turned on his heel and walked out of the room, leaving Charles standing alone with his son. The man's words echoed in his mind, a haunting refrain that refused to fade. The world we're creating is invincible. But Charles didn't feel invincible. He felt small. He felt powerless. He looked back at his son, still lying in the crib, and for the first time, he wondered if there was any hope left. What if the boy was destined for something far darker than he had imagined? What if there was no way to escape the monster they had all become a part of? The door behind him opened once more, and a new figure stepped into the room. This time, it was a woman, tall, with dark hair and a cold, calculating expression. Her eyes locked onto Charles with an intensity that made him uneasy. She was dressed in a black suit, her posture rigid, as if she were constantly in control of every situation. "You must be Mr. Carter," the woman said, her voice smooth, almost hypnotic. "I've heard a great deal about you." Charles turned toward her, his frustration mounting. "Who are you?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm Dr. Isabella Stone," she said, offering him a tight smile. "I'm the one who's been overseeing the genetic manipulation portion of the project. Dr. Powell handles the logistics, the vision, but I'm the one who makes sure everything goes according to plan." Charles frowned, his mind racing. "So you're the one who's been altering my son's genetics?" Dr. Stone didn't flinch. "Yes," she said simply. "But it's not just about altering his genetics, Mr. Carter. It's about enhancing them. Making him more than human. More than just a child. He's the next step in the evolution of our species." Charles couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You're talking about turning him into a weapon." "Not a weapon, Mr. Carter," Dr. Stone corrected him. "A new kind of human. A better kind of human. One who can withstand anything. Who can survive anything. Who can change the world." Her words hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. Charles felt as though the walls were closing in on him. He had been brought into something far more dangerous than he had realized. "How many others are there?" Charles demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "How many others like my son? How many other children have you created like this?" Dr. Stone's eyes glinted with something like amusement. "That's classified information, Mr. Carter. But I'll tell you this, your son is not the only one. There are many more. Genesis is just the beginning." Charles staggered back, the weight of her words crashing into him. Genesis wasn't just some isolated experiment. It was a full-scale operation, an operation designed to reshape humanity itself. He had stumbled into something that no one, not even the most powerful people on Earth, had anticipated. He wasn't just fighting for his son's future anymore. He was fighting for the future of the human race. The weight of everything Charles had discovered pressed down on him like a vice. His mind whirled, and yet the pieces of the puzzle refused to fit together. Genesis. The program that had created his son, the plan that had altered the course of his life forever, and now the monstrous scope of what it truly was, it was all too much to comprehend. He sat in his office, staring out the window, but the glass offered no comfort. The view of the city below seemed distant and insignificant now, as if it were a world he no longer belonged to. Every thought, every emotion, everything that had once mattered seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the stark reality of his situation. His son. The child who was supposed to represent his future, his legacy, now seemed like a ticking time bomb. But worse than that, the more Charles learned, the more he understood how little control he truly had. Charles reached for his phone. His hands shook as he dialed the number he had sworn to never call again, the number of his estranged wife, Emily. She had left him years ago, fed up with his obsession with work, his cold distance, and the void he had created between them. She didn't know about Genesis, didn't know what had happened to their family, what he had become. He had never told her the truth, couldn't tell her. But now, he needed her more than ever. He needed someone who understood the human side of him, not the cold, calculating CEO who had become a stranger to her and to himself. The phone rang twice before her voice answered, soft and wary. "Hello? Emily," Charles said, his voice cracking with the weight of emotion. I need to talk to you. It's about Genesis. About our son. There was a long pause on the other end, and he could feel her hesitation. What are you talking about? She finally asked, her voice tight with confusion and apprehension. You haven't spoken to me in years, Charles. Why now? I don't know what to do anymore, he admitted, his words tumbling out in a rush. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. I've been part of something I never agreed to. Our son, he's not just a child, Emily. He's part of a plan. A project that was designed before either of us even knew it. Silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before Emily spoke again. What are you saying? Are you saying that our son isn't ours? Charles closed his eyes, struggling to find the right words. He's ours biologically, but that's not the whole story. He's been engineered, Emily. His genetics, his mind, they've been manipulated. They've been designed to create a new kind of human. A new race. Her voice grew colder. I don't believe this. You're telling me this now, after everything? I never wanted you to be a part of this. I never wanted you to know. But now, I need you to help me. I can't do this alone. Charles's voice broke, and for the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, raw. I don't know what they're going to do with him. What they want from me. But I have to protect him, Emily. I have to protect our son. She was quiet for a long time, and then, just when Charles thought she had hung up, she spoke again. You don't have to protect him alone. But you need to come to me. We need to talk about this in person. I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but if what you're saying is true, then I need to understand it too. Charles's heart lifted with a mixture of relief and dread. Emily was the only one who could help him now, the only one who could see the humanity in their son, the only one who could help him make sense of the monster that Genesis had created. 2 days later, Charles stood in front of the door to Emily's apartment, his hand hovering over the doorbell. His mind raced with thoughts of what she would say when he told her everything, when he revealed just how far Genesis had gone. He hadn't shared all the details over the phone, and now, as he prepared to walk into her life once more, he felt the weight of it all pressed down on him. He rang the doorbell. When Emily opened the door, she was different. The years had changed her, just as they had changed him. She no longer looked like the woman he had known, her eyes were sharper, her face harder, but there was a sadness in her expression that hadn't been there before. She stepped aside without a word, and he followed her into the apartment. It's good to see you again, Emily, he said, his voice unsure. She looked at him for a moment, her eyes flicking over his face as though searching for something, for any hint of the man she had once known. I'm not sure I agree with that, she replied, her tone even. But let's not waste time. We both know this conversation is long overdue. Charles nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He followed her into the living room, where they both sat on the worn sofa, facing each other. He tried to steady his breathing, tried to compose himself, but it was impossible. The weight of everything, all the secrets and lies, had finally caught up to him. He was no longer the man who had left her behind all those years ago. He was a man drowning in a truth that he couldn't outrun. Genesis, he began, his voice thick with emotion. It's not just a company. It's not just a program. It's a revolution. A new world order. They're creating a race of humans, humans who are designed to survive anything, to be stronger, smarter, better. Our son, Emily. He's part of that. He was never meant to be just a child. Emily's gaze didn't waver. You've told me that much already. What else? Charles took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. They've been manipulating genetics for years. They're building an army, Emily. And Genesis is just the beginning. The people behind it, they want control. They want to remake the world in their image. And they've used us to do it. Emily's eyes narrowed, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. You're telling me you're involved in some kind of genetic manipulation scheme? It's more than that. They've been targeting certain bloodlines. Mine, yours, everything about us has been part of the plan. I didn't know it at the time, but now I see it. We were always part of the game. She stood up abruptly, pacing across the room. So, you've known all along? You've known what they were doing to our son, and you didn't stop them? No, Charles said, his voice breaking. I didn't know, not fully. I didn't understand. But now I do. And I have to stop them, Emily. We have to stop them. Emily turned to face him, her eyes full of fire. How do you expect to stop them, Charles? Do you even know who they are? Who you're up against? I don't care who they are, he said, standing up, his voice growing stronger. I'm not going to let them control my son. He's not their puppet. He's my child. Emily stepped toward him, her expression softening. And what if it's too late? What if the damage has already been done? We don't know that for sure, Charles said urgently. But we can't give up. Not now. She nodded, her eyes meeting his with a newfound understanding. All right, Charles. Let's fight this together. Charles felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time since he had learned the truth about Genesis, he didn't feel alone. He had Emily by his side. They would find a way to protect their son, no matter what it took. But even as he allowed himself a small measure of hope, he couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was only just beginning.